Hello, everybody. Welcome to Podcaster Showcase, a monthly live broadcast brought to you by the International Podcast Day team. I am Dave Lee, co-founder of International Podcast Day. I want to thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So each month we showcase podcasters and voices from around the world, and of course, this broadcast is no different. So before we get started, a quick reminder to head over to internationalpodcastday.com/podcaster showcase. You can find and check out some of the previous showcase videos that we've had over the last 5 or 6 months. So let's go ahead and dive into it. This month, we are welcoming Alex and Vlada. They are co-hosts of the Soundrise podcast, a podcast in which they explore both mainstream and obscure bands and musicians, giving background, commentary, and reviews on portions of their discography. And one really cool thing is that they just celebrated 1 year of podcasting, which is very, very exciting. So congratulations, guys. So Vlada and Alex, welcome to Podcaster Showcase. How are you both doing today?
Oh, thank you so much for having us. We're really happy to be here, and we're doing great.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dave, for inviting us, and hello to all the viewers around the world.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We connected over on Twitter or maybe Instagram. I can't remember. I kind of get them all mixed up. We quickly switched over to email and was able to work this out. So I'm really excited. You guys are originally based in Serbia, but now one of you is in Serbia and one of you are in Poland. And as we were talking pre-show, that even though you guys are separated, you have this podcast which allows you to really stay connected and enjoy your passion and love and enthusiasm for music. And that's one of the great things I love about podcasting.
Yes, it absolutely, connects people all over the world, especially friends. And obviously, since Vlada has moved to Poland in the meantime, this really helps us, maintain that relationship. So, yeah, a great way to maintain your friendship.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this just goes to show also how cool this whole format is, that we get to talk to people all around the world, get to share our thoughts about music and also life sometimes. And we also get to keep our friendship going in a way, keep our friendship active, which I think might be the most valuable thing in this whole venture.
That is true. Well, guys, I'm going to step out of the way. Really looking forward to what you guys are going to share, and I'll be sharing links for all of our viewers, so make sure you guys go visit them on social media. Make sure you go check out and subscribe their podcast. So anyways, guys, enjoy. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Dave. All right, Vlada. So obviously, Dave put some, topics and teasers, so to say, in his social media post. So first, can you explain to all the viewers our format? And I will also touch on that as well, because you're actually the author of it.
Yeah, Alex and I, we've been thinking a lot about starting our own podcast, starting something related to music. But we weren't quite sure what to do. There's so much stuff out there. There's so many reviewers. There's so many shows where people discuss different things, different bands. There are even podcasts solely dedicated to one act. But I was thinking the cool thing would be to choose a different artist every week and take a portion of their discography, in particular 3 records, and then talk about these 3 records. And that would give us a nice little sample about what this act is all about, right? Because I feel often people tend to be prejudiced towards certain acts because they only know them from a certain period or by certain songs. So this way, we get to experience artists to the fullest, in a sense, right? Not always possible. Some acts out there have a huge output of 30, 40 records, but at least it gives us a good sample of something to talk about.
Yeah, and guys, it's not always about picking our favorite bands. We always challenge ourselves. We want to discover unknown bands or bands that we don't really know a lot about, especially me, because Vlada has been listening to music way longer than me, so this show is kind of educational for me as well. So we tend to pick, from different eras. 50s, 60s, 90s, and that way we also want to attract different kinds of audience. And Vlada, would you like to touch on that? We kind of know, what kind of people listen to us, but I think this network is actually much wider, don't you think?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I wanted us to create a podcast that could find its audience in all walks of life, so to say, among different generations, um, in different countries, and so on. And that's why we're trying to make sure that the artists that we talk about are very diverse, right? That we're not focused only on a very, very specific genre or a very specific type of music. And
Yeah.
in essence, I think what the two of us are trying to do as well is to learn more about music as we work on this show, because as much music as we might like and listen to in our privacy, there's so much out there, and the world of music is so wondrous that you can never get tired of it. But sometimes you need to be able to challenge yourself. So Alex, what do you think? Was this podcast a nice way for us to challenge ourselves as well?
Yeah, we have released, I think, 40 episodes so far, and that number includes a variety of genres, pop, rock, solo, funk, jazz, and so on. And there have been some bands that were completely unknown to me, and that are like typical for you, Vlada. You are really into like prog rock, jazz, and that stuff. And it was actually the first time for me to listen to entire records. Let's say an entire prog record. And that's where you came in. You talked about how you love prog, how you have a history with that. And on the other hand, I was, completely new to that. I had, as you like to say, a fresh pair of ears. And it's been, as I said, it's really education basically in the pop world, so to say. But speaking of music, obviously the pandemic is still going on. Unfortunately, we can't really go to concerts, festivals, gigs, and so on. But there is actually a way to still, explore music and listen to a lot of stuff. So Vlada, um, is music one of your, let's say, biggest stress reliefs during this pandemic?
I would say in general as well, not just during the pandemic. I think it's, at some point you even wonder, because music has been with me all my life. I wonder if it's just an addiction or a stress reliever, right? Because you really
Yeah,
need music in order to function sometimes.
yeah,
And to me, it's always, when I put something on, when I put a record on, it's always like setting out on a journey. And that's what I wanted to share with our audience, that excitement of discovering new bands, new artists, maybe new genres, even,
mm,
uh, letting your
absolutely.
letting your mind wonder, letting yourself be challenged in that sense. And this is the most exciting thing for me. And I'm so grateful that it's two of us and that we have somewhat different perspectives, even though we have a lot of stuff in common. We like some bands. We're both fans of certain bands, but I think it's really cool when you say, "Oh, let's check out Florence and the Machine," which we just did. Our last episode is dedicated to
Yep.
Florence and the Machine, and I wasn't much of a fan, but this really gave me an opportunity to dig deeper into their catalog, to think it through, to see where they're coming from. And I think once you take that approach towards music, you start hearing things that you wouldn't necessarily hear in passing. Wouldn't you agree with
Yeah.
that?
Absolutely. I think we tend to view records and bands from different perspectives. Okay, you can listen to a song and say, okay, this is not really my taste, not my cup of tea. But you can also hear something that's good in it. Let's say a bass line or backing vocals or something. So we always challenge ourselves, and we try to rate these records, which is not really easy. We have these ratings
No.
from 1 to 10, and we always say that all of our ratings are tentative, right, Vlada?
I think, with ratings, I think we kind of introduced that element because we want our audience to have some kind of scale by which they can measure how much we liked certain records. But truth to
Yeah,
be told, I think ratings are awful when it comes to talking about music because they never really truly give you the full picture of how good something is or why it's good. Because
yeah,
that's another thing about music. You may think that something is inferior to something else, but there's a moment in time when you're in the mood for that music, when you need that particular emotion, that sentiment that you can only get
yeah,
from that certain artist or from that certain genre. And I think that's why ratings don't always do the justice. But the upside is, and I think you will confirm this, that uh, our approach of listening to three records and then talking about them at great length really allows us to go into details, to talk about
yeah,
individual songs, to talk about performers themselves, what makes them special. And that's what we want our audience also to hear. I want our audience to hear about somebody that they haven't checked out yet, and then
yeah.
give them a listen. If they do that and if they discover a new favorite artist, then I will consider our podcast to be absolutely successful.
Spot on, spot on. Up next, do we have something else also to discuss about the show, or maybe something outside the show? Vlada, anything that springs to your mind?
Well, I wanted to talk to you more about certain things because we don't really get this chance to discuss our experience. It's been a year since we started. And I
Yeah,
wanted to ask you about some of the stuff. I mentioned how we challenge each other. And I
yeah,
remember in one of the early episodes, because I was particularly enthusiastic about all this and I wanted to talk about certain artists that may be very much unknown to most people. So I asked you to listen to ECM Jazz. And ECM is a
oh,
famous jazz label based in Germany, known for a very eclectic approach to music, known for combining musicians from all over the world and giving them absolute creative freedom. And how did you feel when you had to listen to something that was so removed from what you ordinarily listen
yeah.
to?
It was so different. Well, I have to say that, let's say, the first couple of songs or instrumental tracks, whatever, whatever you want to call it, um, I was kind of prejudiced, and that's what happens when you just start off. You just approach it totally like you're in an, let's say, a foreign country, and you don't know anybody there. You don't know where to go. You don't have any friends there. So that was the mindset in the beginning. But then when I give the album a second listen, then it becomes different. Then I can see some positives. Then I can also compare to the other records. I can't say that I'm a fan of these ECM records, but
I am.
yeah, you're a super fan. But it was definitely something that made me think. And even if you don't like the band, you can just have a little, let's say, food for thought. You can think about it. You can also try to guess what kind of audience is into this music, what kind of people are into this music, and so on. But speaking of ECM, that's a very interesting reference. We also covered some Norwegian artists, right? And
Yes.
most of the time we talk about American and British bands for obvious reasons, but we also have this cosmopolitan aspect. So, Vlada, uh, we consider ourselves to be global citizens in a way, and music definitely plays a part in that mindset. So, how does that affect your cosmopolitanism?
Yeah, that's a good topic, I think, because one thing that we're trying to do, and maybe so far we haven't fully realized that, we want to check out music from other countries, not just the English speaking world, which kind of dominates the music scene, whether we speak about mainstream music or, something that's more obscure. It's usually always from an English speaking country, but there's so many great acts from other places. Let's say Norway, for example, Scandinavia, but also we talked in one of the episodes, which I would love you all to check out. We talked about old Yugoslav rock bands, bands from our neck of the woods.
Cracking
Uh,
episode.
yeah, and you always wonder, is there something you're missing out just because of the way you were brought up in a certain, in a certain box, so to say, right?
Yeah,
And if we can challenge you, if we can pique your curiosity about artists that are different from what you're ordinarily accustomed to, if we can get you to hear some music in a foreign language, that's, I think, also another great success. And I think as we grow, as this podcast grows, I hope that we will be able to cover artists from other places, from maybe from other continents, not just like Europe and then America, but maybe
yeah.
African music. I was actually thinking about that too, like introducing some African acts. So pay attention to that. So, Alexander, what,
Stay
what do you
tuned.
think about all that?
It's interesting that you mentioned both the Balkans and Africa because those two terms kind of lead me to Chris Heckman and the Walkabouts. So what's interesting about that episode? I think we recorded it last year in fall, probably. Um, so they are a Seattle-based band. They were founded there, but they actually have a huge fan base in Europe, in Germany, in the Balkans, in Norway. Chris Ekman, one of
Greece.
the
Oh, yeah.
Greece, yeah, there you go. So Chris Ekman, one of the founding members of that band, and also one of our guests, because we've also had some musician interviews. That's another interesting feature. He's based in Slovenia, and he talked about this global approach. Listening to all kinds of music from Africa, from I think Asia, and also being influenced by these mainstream rock artists. And um, I have to say, I would really like to know from our listeners and all the people from around the world that are watching this stream right now. Does if you have a song in a different language, does that prevent you from enjoying that song? Because honestly, as much as I'm a music enthusiast, it does affect me in a bit, Vlada. Don't you think?
I think it really depends on the genre. Of course, if it's some kind of instrumental music, then it's universal. You can relate
Yeah,
to it. But with rock music, it's a good question because I remember listening to a great Danish band called Gasoline, which I hope we will cover as well. And Gasoline, when I first started listening to them, I didn't really know any Danish at all, but I still really enjoyed the music. But when I started learning Norwegian, because I lived in Norway for a while, I started understanding the lyrics. I was able to read them, to understand the songs, and my appreciation went up. So it really depends. If it's some kind of singer songwriter music, then of course the words are very often essential. But for a lot of rock music, I think the music itself speaks louder than words. Even with perfect bands, like Pink Floyd, where both words and music are sublime, just music alone could take you to that heavenly place, right? And
yeah,
so it's really relative, but it's always good to explore. And I was talking about this kind of getting ahead of us because we so far we haven't really done so much globally diverse stuff. I would say we
yeah,
were mostly focused on American and British acts, and mostly because right now we're still young. We are in the process of growing our audience, and we want to focus on the musicians that we both appreciate, but
yeah,
also can attract audience at the moment, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so yeah, so we cover both mainstream artists and sometimes somewhat more obscure artists depending on our inspiration. But Alexander, I don't think we told our audience about our system of choosing the artists for the episodes. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so it's a I think it's a process that cannot be easily explained. So on one hand, we have our wish lists. I have a lot of bands there. I'm sure Vlada has his long list as well, and there's so many factors there. Um, Obviously the period. For example, if we did last week, if we did a 70s band, I'm not sure if I would repeat that period. Maybe I would choose someone from the 80s or from the 2000s. So that's one of the factors. Also, is this a band that is super popular? Because we don't want to do super popular bands. Because I feel like, as you Vlada mentioned earlier during this stream, there's a lot of music reviewers out there on YouTube, podcasters, and so on. And I'm sure a lot of people have already talked about, let's say, Metallica or Guns N' Roses or I don't know, Rihanna and so on. So we try to find that middle ground, between being,
Hmm.
mainstream, being a pop artist, but not having this super huge mega following. So that is also one of my reasons. And sometimes I'm just curious. Like, for example, Florence and the Machine. I was really curious to discover them, or Weezer. And I think the most beautiful part about this show is that when you discover this band, for example, Weezer in my case, and you just absolutely fall in love with them. I'm still listening to their records. I think we released that episode a couple of months ago. And as Vlada said, if you guys happen to have this experience when you hear the band for the first time on our show and then just carry on listening to their discography, I think that's the most wonderful feeling. And
Yeah.
that's also been the thing during this pandemic, obviously because of the podcast, but also now I have this mindset where I want to constantly discover new music. And I don't even think that I'm nowhere near completing my music collection, Lada.
Yes, and of course, I mean it's a lifelong process,
Mm.
discovering new music. And sometimes you see people kind of settle in their ways, and we are all guilty of that from time to time. And this kind of podcast is a perfect opportunity to shake things up a bit. And we've had, as you can see here in the pictures, we've had the bands
Yeah,
like the Melvins, a band that's well known, but it's not necessarily mainstream, right? But has a huge following around the world. But still, somebody may not know about them, and hopefully they will listen to our show and they will get curious enough to check out their music. Then you see we have, uh, for
Michael
example,
Kiwanuka.
yeah, who's quite big right now, right? But
Yeah,
uh, you know, we want to show how music is not something that will ever die down, because there's a lot of people online, especially those who like older stuff. Like I'm one of those people who is really into 60s, 70s stuff primarily. That's what I grew up with. Um, and a lot of people who are into this stuff sometimes wrongfully assume that there's no great musicians out there anymore because they're just exposed to mainstream stuff, to pop music, which by the way has its own role, right? uh,
yeah,
and then we want to break those prejudices. So one episode you will have somebody from the 60s or 70s. The next episode you will have Michael Kiwanuka, a modern artist with great skills, great instrumental skills, great voice, in many ways inspired by those artists of the
yeah,
golden days, the golden era. And this is definitely what we want to show, that
yeah,
music is no matter how threatened it might be because of the way the business is run, because of the streaming services or whatnot, music always find its way to the listener. And now more than ever, I think we are in a situation where everything is at the tip of our fingers. Everything is so easily available.
Yeah,
And I think that's also great, a reason why we have a show like this, because we can, another thing that you didn't mention, is that very often our episodes, the bands, or the artists that we cover, are chosen by our audience, by our patrons.
oh,
So our
yeah.
and that's what
Some
we
some
like.
fantastic bands.
It's great because sometimes they really throw us a curveball. Okay, Lord Huron, for example, an
Yeah,
artist that we covered, an indie singer songwriter,
yeah.
one of our
Spirit.
patrons. Yeah,
Yeah,
Spirit, band that I was very familiar with, but one of our
yeah,
patrons also loved this band.
yeah,
And we love those curveballs. I
yeah,
don't know if we always hit them. Maybe sometimes we miss the whole point, but the whole process is enjoyable. And that's
yeah.
another thing. Yeah. Just sorry, Alex. I just wanted to say,
Yeah, go on.
sometimes we have very different opinions on these bands. And sometimes I say very often in our show, during our show, that some of your opinions are a travesty, because I just
Or
can't
far fetched.
fathom.
So yeah,
Yes, I can't fathom why anyone would have that opinion. But that's the joy of it as well. These different sensibilities, different opinions.
yeah. And for example, you have these music magazines and music reviewers. For example, I just remember that we've had some records that were like totally trashed by some reviewers, like 2 stars out of five. And on the other hand, we gave these records, favorable ratings, like a 7 or 8 out of 10 or something like that. And obviously, there's no really objectivity in music, and I think that's a kind of a controversial topic. Do you think that there's objectivity in music?
Well, no, not entirely. I mean, there is some kind of objectivity to a certain level. Like, you can tell if somebody is really like out of tune, right? If somebody
Yeah,
just simply doesn't perform well.
yeah,
But you know, there are some artists out there who are very idiosyncratic, who sound really weird to a lot of people, and then some other people love them. Even some of the greats like Bob Dylan, a lot of people cannot stand his voice. I, for one, love his voice. I've loved it since I first heard it. I think it's unique. I think it's special. I think it adds a lot of personality to those already fantastic songs. And I completely disagree when people say that Bob Dylan's songs sound better when they're covered by other people.
oh, that's kind of far-fetched, I would say.
Yeah, but a lot of people have that view. You'd
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
surprised. But then again, remember when we did an episode about Robert Johnson, maybe the most important blues musician of all time, right? The guy who
yeah,
defined blues music, without whom you wouldn't even have rock music nowadays. And that was a very special Halloween episode, because there's a certain element of supernatural to the whole Robert Johnson story. And we even wrote a short story that I performed at the beginning of
yeah.
that episode. But then when we got into a discussion about Robert Johnson, you were surprisingly, to me at least, lukewarm
Harsh.
towards his music.
That's honestly, after that episode, I have looked back on my ratings. I tried to kind of look at them from a different perspective. Try to take your criticism, and you obviously have to. And this is also a beautiful part of the show. You have to look at the historical context. Robert Johnson is. I mean, this is not my opinion, but it's probably the most important figure in our in today's pop music, right? It's where it all started, and that was the case with, I think, Muddy Waters as well, and many other bands that we have covered. So Sometimes you can say, oh, I don't like this, it doesn't sound like, the bands that I listen to nowadays. But you have to look at the context and just um, see that, that's where it started. And probably your favorite musicians used to listen to these guys. Like, I'm sure that some of my favorite musicians used to listen to Muddy Waters. They appreciate him, they appreciate his work and his legacy, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's the thing. It's always good to dig deep into the past,
Yeah,
which is an extremely important aspect of our show. Uh, as we said, we like to present artists from different eras. And the best thing about it is, and this is my opinion, that music over the years has been more and more commodified, packaged in a certain way that's very attractive to an average consumer. Even great music, right? It's all
yeah,
about marketing in many ways, packaging. When you go back to those old blues guys, it's all very devoid of all that. It's
yeah.
all, not to say that
It's
music
raw.
wasn't a commodity back in those days, but it's very
Yeah,
raw, it's very real, genuine, and the emotions that you feel while listening to that can really be resonant, with you in a way that a lot of more polished music fails to accomplish. Um,
absolutely.
and one of the saddest thing for me is when I see how much of this brilliant music is often overlooked because it's buried not just under the weight of years and centuries, decades. Now I started sounding all dramatic, but yeah,
Yeah,
buried under decades. But also, there's so much going on that people sometimes just don't pay attention to these things anymore. And that's what
yeah,
we also want to achieve. We want to bring forth some of these artists. For example,
yeah,
next episode that we're going to do is going to be about the great bluesman Jimmy Dawkins, great Chicago bluesman. And while looking into him online, I was surprised with the scarcity of information on this guy who was definitely in his time, in the 60s, 70s, one of the best blues musicians in the world.
yeah,
And that made me a bit sad because it seems like the world is moving in such a great pace and there's such an overload of information that sometimes you can't find a lot of information about such wonderful and great people like Jimmy Dawkins. And if we can contribute to people hearing that name and checking out his records, then this podcast makes perfect sense, right?
yeah, yeah. And whenever we talk about bands, and whenever we are entering, the finishing stages of the episode, we tend to say, if you're into, let's say, power ballads, you should check out this artist. If you're into metal, if you want to know more about grunge, you should, discover their discography. And we tend to match, we like to make perfect matches. If you're our listener just looking out for some new music, and we want to find what you're looking for, and that's how I think we manage to retain some of our listeners and keep them engaged. But I actually want to now go back to the format and all of that stuff. We can also discuss bonus content, interviews, minisodes. For example, I'm currently wearing a T-shirt with a band that we have done a bonus episode on. So, Vlada, can you kind of describe this concept of having an additional bonus minisode, or and also musician interviews, because that was a fantastic experience for us.
Yes. So basically, sometimes we have this strict format, but sometimes we want to step outside a bit. Like Alexander wanted to talk about Newstead, the
Yeah,
band that was founded by Jason Newsted from Metallica, that was one of his favorite bands growing up and all that.
one of my
Um,
role models when I was in high
yeah,
school.
yeah, we are very different generations. I am how 13 years older than you, right?
Yeah,
So for me, that's weird that that's like a band that you discovered in high school, Newstead. But and we wanted to talk about Newstead, but they don't really have a big discography, so we decided to do a mini-sode and
yeah.
just put it out there, because it means a lot to Alexander, and that's also one thing we're
And
doing
also
this.
you as a Metallica fan, and we have our little personal, let's say, discussions and feuds where we talk about different stages of Metallica. You have the early thrash metal that is phase. You have this '90s phase, and obviously Saint Anger, which is I think one of the things that we can never agree on because I'm a big fan of Saint Anger, and Vlada kind of appreciates it, but he's more of an old school fan, and that's the thing. You can blend two worlds into one mini. So I think it was like 25 minutes long, nothing special, right?
Yeah, and then interviews. Interviews is something that we still
Oh,
need to work
interviews.
on, because we've
Yeah,
had two so far, and we want to have more as we go along. Unfortunately, recently we haven't done any due to a very tight schedule that we're on.
yeah, yeah,
But we want to reach out to musicians. We want to talk to them. We want to hear stuff straight from the horse's mouth, so to say. And we were very honored to have Chris Ackman on our show, and we had an amazing interview with Chris that I encourage you to check out. If you haven't heard about Chris Ackman, Alexander talked about Chris earlier during this podcast. But if you're not familiar, Chris Ackman is a wonderful singer songwriter from Seattle, Washington, the founder of the Walkabouts, a great band that has a cult following in Europe, kind of Americana band that also combines a bit of punk aesthetic, but also some dark music, much in the vein of the likes of Nick Cave. So there's a bit of something for everyone who enjoys great singer songwriter music. And Chris gave us such phenomenal stories from
yeah,
his time in the music industry. He talked about meeting people like Brian Eno, and it was Towns Van Zandt. Remember when he told us about how they toured
yeah,
with Towns Van Zandt? I was so mind
yeah.
blown. Towns Van Zandt being one of
I,
my greatest heroes as
yeah.
a songwriter. And then
I
Chris
think we
Sackman.
once. Sorry for interrupting. There's a very interesting bit. I think that towards the end of that interview, we asked Chris, if there was like your idol, your role model, a musician, obviously, that you would like to
Mhm.
meet, who would it be? And I think he said, I have already met him, and that was
Yeah,
actually
yes,
Towns Van
something along
Zandt.
those lines. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's another thing. And Chris himself is such a great songwriter. He's like, check out his stuff, for example, on Bandcamp, or check out the Walkabouts music. I think that music is at the top from the
and his
perspective of
record label as
songwriting.
well.
Yeah. And he has a wonderful record label, Glitter House, so that we talked about. So this was the most exciting thing for us, getting to meet people like that, because we're just music fans, and
Yeah,
we want to talk to our audience from that position. We are just like you, and we want to hear from you, and we want you to disagree with us or agree with us, or tell us what you think, or tell us if we made a horrible mistake by saying something, or commend us on our knowledge, sometimes, hopefully, right?
yeah.
Uh, so as music fans, this is like a playground of sorts for us.
Yeah. And speaking of, getting feedback from our audience, I also want to touch on the Patreon thing. So we have a dedicated community of patrons who support us financially and really help us, and also give us, quality feedback. But when it comes to suggesting bands, um, there have been some really fascinating bands. Obviously we do our own research and we try to find different bands, but sometimes, when you have someone, let's say, external, for example, Cold Blood. To be honest, Father, I would never guess that band. Don't know about you, but it's really
I
exciting
knew
when
of
you get
them.
different. Yeah,
I knew of them, but I wouldn't necessarily choose them,
yeah,
as a band to talk about. And our patron Dave, he suggested, uh, Cold Blood, an old soul blues San Francisco band, and it was a great, great episode and a great experience listening to that music. And
yeah,
I hope that as our community grows, and I think the more fans we get, the more diverse our show will become, because then we will have more input from the fans. So if you're out there listening to this, we invite you to like our page on Facebook, Soundrise Podcast. We invite
yeah.
you to check out also a discussion group that we have, where you are free to make
Yeah.
comments, suggestions, and
It's
so
very
on.
intimate. Yeah, where we can, like, if you don't want to leave public comments, yeah, you can just become a member of that group where we discuss with our most diehard fans that have been with us since day one. You can also join that community and talk about it. So yeah, engaging with fans, I think this is a general podcast thing, attracting the right audience, keeping them engaged, also and also giving them what, let's say, what they want to hear. That's why we don't really want to discuss only favorite bands. I can go with, let's say, Gorillaz or Oasis and just brag about them and blabber how they're fantastic, how I love them. That's not really the point. And for example, the next artist that Vada mentioned earlier during this stream, I've never heard of that artist. So I'm actually in your position right now, dear
Mhm.
listeners, and
Yeah,
dear, yeah,
Jimmy Dawkins, who we're gonna talk about
yeah,
very soon, right? Um, well, that's the thing. I recently discovered Jimmy Dawkins. I heard that name before, and I was
yeah,
so amazed, so blown away. But when I looked into him, there was not much. So I thought we should do it, right? And
yeah.
and I love it when you also challenge me with different artists, even though sometimes I have to admit I'm a bit frustrated when I'm prejudiced against certain artists, and you're like, "Oh,
Can you
let's
name some of
do
those artists?
like Gnarls Barkley." We did Gnarls Barkley, and interestingly enough, in spite of my unwillingness to talk about Gnarls Barkley, it was one of our more popular episodes.
Yeah,
So.
yeah,
And sometimes we like that conflict of opinions.
yeah,
Sometimes we have very heated arguments during the show, all in good faith, of course.
yeah.
um, but
It's
that's
all
also
banter,
something.
right?
Yeah, the banter and uh, the exchange, because we want this to be not just a typical music review or something like that. We want it to be energetic. We want it to be spontaneous. We want it to be kind of like a conversation in a bar, in a sense. And that's why
Absolutely.
we want more feedback from our audience as well. Except, we're very, very happy about both positive and negative feedback. Except we got some really funny ones. For example, somebody was bothered by our accents once. That was, but
Yeah,
that was the only hateful comment that we really got. So I think we're doing a good
yeah,
job so far. But I would like you all to listen to our episodes and pass your own judgment.
yeah, yeah. Especially, for example, if we're talking about a band that we're not really fans of, we're just discovering them, and maybe there's like a super fan that has a lot of their records, that has seen
Hmm.
them live multiple times. You can give us a different perspective, because, as you probably know, after a couple of years, being with a certain band, you get a different perspective. For example, Florence and the Machine, right? When you first heard them, you weren't too impressed, and now when we discussed them in our episode, you could hear something else, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes we hear some music and we don't initially like it, or it might be just one song, right? And we base our whole opinion about the band, about a certain artist, only on that one song we know. It's and that's very frustrating sometimes to hear people, you know, talking about certain favorite artists of yours based on one bad album that they had that happened to be commercial or one song. It's like I always have arguments about Bruce Springsteen, who I love so much and who I think is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. A lot of people think of him solely based on those images from the 80s, born in the USA era when he had that headband and, kind of looked like this blue collar hero. So people perceive him in a certain way, and then they don't know, for example, about Nebraska, a record that he released 2 years before Born in the USA, which was an all acoustic record that sounded very intimate, that was in many ways closer to that old folk and blues music of the 30s, 40s, 50s than modern day music, right? There wasn't
Yeah.
any bombast, there wasn't any commercial tendencies. So people are too quick to judge. Everyone is, including us. And this podcast is, at least for us, a liberation from that. But maybe some of our
Yeah.
listeners will get something out of it as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It connects us with people from all around the world. For example, um, we mentioned the Patreon polls, and I think one of the first polls included Sly and the Family Stone, and we all know how huge that band was and still is. I think they're still active, as far as I'm concerned.
Sly,
Um,
not sure. Maybe.
yeah, yeah, could be. They're pretty, they're from the '60s, so let's say a vintage band. But you can sense that this person possibly has something in common with you, and even though we don't know each other, we probably won't see each other live ever. Who knows? But I think, especially during the pandemic, where we can't really travel, I think connecting through music is really special because music, nobody can pressure you to listen to something. It's all you. It's your personal thing. It's your personal stamp. The
Mm-hmm.
music that you listen to, it's part of your personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's such a bad approach to mock people for having a different taste or for liking certain artists that you don't like. And I think everyone goes through that stage when they grow
Yeah,
up. And
yeah.
but but it's so
You
wrong
mock
to
me
have that
sometimes for
approach.
for my opinions, right?
Yeah, but it's all very well deserved because there are
Yeah,
certain red lines. There are certain situations where things that you say are absolutely blasphemous, and I love pointing those out during our podcast. Maybe I don't
yeah.
know. I hope I won't be perceived as a villain. Uh, but Alexander,
It's
he's
always it's always good to have these two sides during an argument.
yeah, Alexander is too kind, too kind. Well, I'm a bit older and maybe a bit crankier, and sometimes, when you give out a rating like you gave Robert Johnson a 6, that really hurt my feelings. I almost felt
Yeah,
it was personal.
yeah, yeah. But at the end of the day, guys, we never cross that personal line. It's all just banter, and we just love to hear from each other. Um, Also, Vlada, I want to ask you. I think this is a very important topic. We've discussed the pandemic and starting this show and so on. When you combine the pandemic and the pandemic has been really devastating for our mental health, and I want to ask you how much has this podcast affected your mental health? Does it really help you go through all the daily problems and stuff? Do you look forward to it? And before I give you the microphone, guys, just to let you know, we release one episode bi-weekly. So let's say 2 episodes per month. We will also try to invite some musicians to come on and talk with us, and also see some um, s- you know bonus content. So yeah, but going back to the mental health topic, Vlada, what is your experience when you combine all these factors?
I think right now it's really difficult sometimes because we spend most of our time working and then often just staying at home. Whether we work or have free time, we're always at home more or less. And for me, it's been exceptionally hard at times. But music was always there to kind of keep me going, and I think podcast was definitely a major part of that because we got to listen to so many different artists, and that was such a thrill and so exciting, not being settled in your ways, because sometimes, kind of making that step forward, trying out something new really helps you retain your mental balance as well. And you can't find better therapy than music. When it comes to
Yeah,
art, I think music has that therapeutical value that's almost irreplaceable.
good point. Yeah, because basically, we can't go out, we can't really meet, we can't gather, and you just pick your earphones or headphones and play some stuff on the streaming service that you use, whether it's Spotify, Tidal, Deezer, or whatever, or YouTube, and it kind of it gives you that feeling um, that you're actually with someone, that you're actually kind of illustrating that you're at a gig, right, Lada?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, that communal feeling that you get from music. And it's also, when it comes to our friendship, I really love the fact that we talk about music, we talk about art. Also, my friend, for example, my friends Grazia and Nila. Grazia is Italian and Nila is from Great Britain. I love talking about music with them. I love discussing artists. They're also very enthusiastic about old music too. Like we can talk about some old bluesmen or songwriters.
Folk music,
And
right?
and I love that. I think that uh, sharing music, sharing art with other people is one of the best things you can do. And I think that's the underlying motivation of our podcast.
Yeah, yeah, spot on. So should we now move on to maybe asking the audience to maybe leave us some comments or ask any questions if you have? We've been talking a lot about the show. Is there something that you would like to know or maybe ask us directly?
Hey guys, yeah, I haven't seen any comments come in yet. We had a little weird thing with our Facebook page, so hopefully I didn't lose any comments there. But you guys have this is a great format, and I for one wanted to show that I'm intrigued to listen to your Fugazi one because
Oh,
Oh yes,
I
that's a
have
yes.
that's a
I have
great band.
yeah I have Fugazi argument right here. Absolutely love this
Such a
album.
great record.
Cash out, full
That's
disclosure.
so good. So good. I think we gave it like 9.5 or something like that. The
Yeah,
rating was. I think now in retrospect, I'd give it a 10. I think everything Fugazi does should be a 10, automatically.
I think. As we mentioned, we always cover three records, and I think "Argument" was actually my favorite record of those that
Mhm.
we chose.
Yeah, yeah, it was so amazing that one. Um, yeah, so it's a great record, Dave. You're a man of taste, obviously.
Yeah,
Yeah, I wanted to pull this out while I was sitting here, and yeah, I actually want to listen to this weekend. That'd be great to kind of go back. It's been
Yeah.
probably maybe like 5 months since I listened to this one, so
Oh
I was
wow.
yeah,
yeah, I was really excited to see that on the list. But yeah, I encourage everybody
yeah,
to head over to. Let me go ahead and drop the links up here so everybody can
yeah.
see. Your link tree, Soundrise podcast, has of course a long laundry list of where they can subscribe to your podcast, where they can follow it, follow them on social media, and here I'll share again real fast. I mean, Stitcher is it's a nice little presentation here. But yeah, Florence and the Machine, The Damned. You have, like you said, the Melvins, Weezer, the Killers. Did drop a couple links for the episode for the Yugoslava music, The Cure. I mean, you guys are hitting on all of these different artists, and I think it's incredible. And yeah, you got a subscriber out of me, and I'm really looking forward to kind of diving in, and especially sometimes when you don't know an artist, to have you share 3 albums on your show.
Yeah.
I think is incredible because artists can really range from record to record, and so to kind of have a well-rounded look to it is awesome.
Yeah. Like, for example, just saw it on the list, the band that we did on Alex's suggestion, Material, a very interesting act, maybe somewhat forgotten, unfortunately. They had such a great debut record that was very experimental, jazzy,
Totally
almost
mind-blowing.
like King Crimson or some stuff like that. But then they went into a completely different direction, and we were so mind blown by the changes, not always in a good way. So but that's so exciting, seeing like how artists can change and develop over the years. I feel like some of the best bands ever are the best because of that quality. People like the Beatles, they were only active for their discography is only like 7 years, but if you go from the first to the last record, it's a huge progress, right?
Yeah. And also, for example, the Weezer episode, we covered, so the first 2 records were, the seminal records from the 90s. And then we jumped to 2019, and, the Black Album was a completely different story. So it's really, sometimes it's impossible. If you have an artist with 20 studio albums in their discography, you can't really cover all of their periods with only 3 records, but sometimes we do manage to do that, and that's really fun.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I want to thank both Vlada and Alex for joining us today. Before we get out of here, I'll give you guys the final word. Where can people find you? I'll go ahead and share some links on the screen here. But I want to thank you guys for joining us. This has been a blast, I know, for me to listen to. And I do subscribe to other music podcasts. I help produce one as well. And so to have this conversation has been really enlightening, really fun. So I want to appreciate, I know our international podcast day community as well is going to enjoy this as they either watch live or they check the replay. So I'll let you guys have the final word, and I'll share out where they can join you guys.
Vlada, you want to mention the Patreon?
All right, so guys, we have a Patreon page. As you can see, it's below. Please check it out. We have some very cool tiers for you. You can support us with as little as $1 a month, right? And that would mean the world to us. If you decide to invest a bit more, you get some special treats. You can even get to suggest an artist for us to cover. And we've covered some amazing artists thanks to our very knowledgeable patrons who are just the best people out there. So if you want to be a part of that elite society, check out our Patreon page. We invite you, and we would really appreciate that as well.
Yeah. On the other hand, I would like to mention our social media sites. So we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The handle is the same, so it's pretty easy to find us, Soundrise Pod. Every social site has, let's say, a different purpose. On Instagram, we do more pictures, polls, quizzes, and so on. On Facebook, we do discussions. We have this separate discussion group that you can also find if you want to have this, let's say, private room for engaging with us and commenting on our episodes. So we're pretty active on all of our accounts, and that's where you can find us.
That's awesome, guys. Well, I encourage everybody out there in International Podcast Dayland to give you guys a follow. This has been an absolute blast. Thank you guys, Alex, Vlada, for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you, showcasing you, and it's just incredible to see the amount of podcast talent that's out there. And throwing in a little music conversation makes it even better. So thank you guys. We appreciate you joining us live here.
Thank you for having us, Dave.
I think it was a great experience. Thank you a lot.
Absolutely. And we encourage all of the podcasters around the world to keep doing what they do, and it's a wonderful industry, and it's constantly growing.
That is true. Yep, it continues to grow. So, on behalf of myself, Dave Lee, co-founder of International Podcast Day, and Alex and Vlada that joined us from Soundrise Podcast, thank you all for joining us. Make sure you guys head over to internationalpodcastday.com/podcaster-showcase to check out the former episodes that we put out there. So, once again, thank you guys, and we will check you out and come join us next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Stay safe.